Hey y'all, and welcome back to another video of my creative life with Kelssweetie, where we read books and we make art. Today we are going over my top 5 favorite horror for right now. This list is constantly changing. By the end of this month, it might have changed, and I would have found a new horror that I love. Who knows? I mean, I'm kind of looking at some of the things I have to read for the rest of this month, and I'm not sure if one is gonna maybe knock one of these out, but I'm sure when I started reading any of these, I didn't think that they were gonna be my favorite new book, but here we are, right? So I wanted to go over my top 5 in my Discord channel and everything. We got somebody new had joined, and they were just kind of saying what their top 5 were in each genre in the different threads that we had. So we had horror and weird lit and thriller, and they gave their top 5 for each, and I really love that. And so I did mine, and then some other people started doing theirs, and I realized that I wanted to kind of share and kind of continue that conversation of what were your top 5. This was hard to make this list. There were some mentions. There's 2 honorable mentions because just having 5, when I'm just I feel like I'm a diverse reader, but I'm also like a genre diverse reader. Like there's many different reasons why a book ends up really moving me. And I had to choose 5, but I didn't want, like, you can't just go, actually I'm going to do a top 7. You could do a top 7. This is technically kind of a top 7. You have a secret too, but I did feel like I wanted to put some honorable mentions. Really are different from one another in many different ways, so I'm kind of excited to share these because I feel like it's not simply just horror for horror's sake, or I think that these are the best horror novels ever created, period. It's just, these are the top 5 that moved me and I still think about constantly, and I will automatically recommend them to somebody immediately if they're like, what's your favorite horror novel? What should I get started with horror? I know that at least one of these, there's gonna be some of y'all who go, that's the worst book they've ever written. And I'm saving it for the end. So let's get to the intro. On the other side, we'll get into these book recommendations. So as I covered in the intro, these books are my top 5, but they aren't necessarily like a strict top 5. Who knows? By next week, I may go, isn't even a horror, it's weird lit. We've talked a lot about that. We'll talk about it more, but who knows? I may read something and it'll be my new top 5. I don't know. It's very hard. It depends on what point of life I'm in, because horror is so socially based. It's so, if it moved you, it's because you got the story, you got what the metaphor was, or where society was as a whole, who are you as a person. It's very dependent on so many things other than just, this is good writing. And I love that about horror. It's also sometimes the worst part about horror, because you get into an argument with somebody about like what their favorite horror books are. Y'all are of course going to argue about which one is which because of when you maybe read a book. I know that I have the same taste as Ellie, one of my friends, Ellie, and she reads tons of horror. But I know that when we read like Nestlings by Nat Cassidy, I got something completely different out of it than she did. Me being somebody who's not a mother, doesn't want to be a mother, and her being a mother to two kids, got completely different things out of it. And when I told her my like reason for liking it as much as I did, she went, oh, you know what? I definitely can see that. And you know, I have a lot more appreciation for that book now. I love that horror is kind of one of the main genres where you could do something like that. I'm basically a horror baby in the grand scheme of things. I got into horror maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and it's really opened my mind to being able to examine society, people. It's really the study of people, and I love that. So getting into these recommendations, my first and favorite is a classic. You probably hear so many people say this all the time, The Exorcist. I know, I'm basic, but I finally read this. They came out with this amazing limited edition cover, which you've probably seen this in many different places, both on like my Instagram, from other horror book readers and everything. This is an amazing cover, y'all. It's bright green. The girl on the front is scary as all get out. The Exorcist and the author name in this cross. I mean, it's just good good design here. But I finally read The Exorcist because so many people always were saying that they loved it. And I was like, okay, it's a classic. I should read it. I feel like I gotta get my wings on this, right? I was not expecting for this to be as modern as it was. This was written in I have to check every single time. 1971? 1971. Our main character, the mother in this book feels so modern to 1971. She feels like she could have stepped right out into today's time. I absolutely am certain of it. It talks about her being a single mother, openly about her divorce, her being very assertive, and even in some moments, like aggressive out of a necessity to get help for her daughter. Reagan's mom is an icon, which after reading this book and then watching the movie, I'm not a huge fan of the movie. The movie's cool. I'm not a huge fan of it. One, because I feel like they inserted after reading the book, I was kind of like expecting it to be more gay. Because seeing the movie and hearing others talk about The Exorcist, the movie, the priest in the movie is going through a lot of bouts in regards to their sexuality. In the book, there's not that many bouts. So I don't really know why that narrative was kind of added, in my opinion. I don't know. The other thing is too, Reagan's mom does not feel as headstrong as she is in the book. In the book, she is having parties and cocktails, and she's an actress, and she's talking to people, and her babysitter, which the babysitter is just completely removed, I feel like, in the movie, and she plays a huge part, like this female relationship. For me personally, I feel like Reagan's mom is more queer in the book. Like, that's where the story is, but you know. And I really love that. I love that the priest in this novel as well, which I don't feel like was in the movie, he's very not what you think a priest is. He's not pious. He's not so devout that you don't feel like he's ever lived a life, that he's only ever been clean with God or anything. And he's also not somebody who feels like he's constantly punishing himself for not being that way either. He just felt very relatable and interesting, and like you actually wanted to have a conversation with this man. He never once looks at Reagan's mom as if she's some harlot because she throws parties or is divorced from her husband, who's an absolute asshole. There's none of that. This book was so much more modern than I thought it would be, and it also didn't feel like it over-sexualized in a way that was uncomfortable, like it kind of does in the movie, and of course in the unrated version. Reagan and the metaphors in regards to sexuality and puberty and the devil and possession and everything. I felt like it was a good balance in the book, and in all honesty, it made me kind of not enjoy the movie as much. I know some of y'all love The Exorcist, so I'm sorry in advance. But yeah, I absolutely recommend it. I know that so many people are always talking about The Exorcist. It's a classic for a reason. And I think that it's a classic in more ways than most probably would figure a book that was written by a man in 1971 would realize it would be. So we're starting there. These are in no particular order, by the way. This isn't like my number one fave, but I do recommend it. I had to put a classic in here. It rightfully so is. I'm also putting in a collection of stories here because I felt like this book, one, was one of the first ARCs I ever received, which was amazing. What was even more great was that I loved every single story in here, and I'm still wanting full-length novels of every story that was featured in here, and that was The Black Girl Survives first in this one. I'm still blown away by this collection of stories. I mean, one, this cover is amazing. I know. Y'all know you're gonna get a cover look from me. I felt like every story in here, whether depending on how much I love them, I liked every single one at the very least. And I didn't feel like any of them were a monolith of being a black girl or being a black woman. We even have a non-binary black person in this story. In these stories, there's queerness is explored, culture is explored, family issues are explored, religion's explored in here. So many different topics that have to do with being a black femme. are explored in this book more than just racism. And I was talking to somebody recently about Black horror and what does Black horror mean, which is fantastic because I had the huge opportunity of interviewing with Tanana Reevdu for Night Terror Magazine's horror noir issue in February, and we got into this conversation about what is Black horror, and I really agreed with what she said, and that is that Black horror is simply you are Black writing a horror story about a Black character. That is it. That's it. That's the narrative. It doesn't need to be like, you know, racism is the fear and the horror all along. It doesn't need to be, you know, strife and struggle and all of this in regards to Black people and our specific experiences as far as the socio-economical conversations and history are involved. It is simply just that. And I love that because I feel like in a lot of ways that pertains to every marginalized group making horror as well. But I feel like sometimes in Black horror we get pigeonholed into these conversations of only surrounding racism. And while that is one portion of it, it's not the monolith of every single experience of being Black, period. That's all we are. And I loved that every single one of the authors approached that conversation very differently. We have space horror in here. We have queer horror in here. We have body horror. We have monster stories. We have zombie stories. We have growing up being Black. We have hauntings. There's so many different ways and conversations that each one of these authors brought up in here. And that's why I love this book, because it really shows how diverse the experience of being a Black femme is. That it's not simply, okay, she experienced racism. Okay, she experienced misogyny. And those are the only horrors we can ever talk about. One of my favorite stories in here is actually The Brides of Devil Bayou. If you love The Craft and you have always been like, I wish I could have The Craft, but it's just Black girls, it's just a Black narrative, that one's for you. And not because it's like for Black women calling the corners per se, but the vibe, the tone of the story in regards to a Black woman and voodoo and curses and witchiness and all of that is very much that story. And I still think about it all the time going, I really wish I could get a full-length novel. All of the time. So I highly, highly recommend this one. I know that you guys probably a year or two ago were seeing this everywhere. And again, rightfully so. This book is great and I will keep on recommending it so that it never dies down and we can maybe get a volume 2 of this because I absolutely loved it. Speaking of Tanana Reevdu and collections of stories, The Wishing Pool. I got this as an ARC. Didn't think much of it, to be completely honest with you, because unfortunately I judge books by their cover, and I don't feel like this cover per se does this book very much justice, and I think that's the reason why a lot of people unfortunately haven't picked it up, even though it's an amazing collection. I've spoken in other videos about how I'm a stickler when it comes to short story collections, because I do not want to get through 13 stories and go, so 2 of those were basically the same, but they had the same character. 3 of those. Or me to go, did I just read this? I don't want to do that. Or else you could have just given me 4 different novellas, to be honest. I want to read every single short story and go, oh, this is something all of its own. And The Wishing Pool does that. The Wishing Pool absolutely does that. Tanana Reevdu is amazing. I don't know how she thought of so many different stories to put into one book. And what's even better is that The Incident at Bear Creek Lodge is actually going to be her next novel that she'll be putting out, and it started in here, The Wishing Pool. So if you at all are a Tanana Reevdu fan and you have not picked up this collection because of the cover like I did, or because you're just not a huge fan of short story collections usually, I do recommend that you pick this up before you pick up that book that she's putting out come next year. She's already said it's going under Saga Press, I believe, and it's 2026. I think it's spring 2026. I'm not certain on the season, but I know it's coming out next year, and it is based on The Incident at Bear Creek Lodge, which is really great. It's a really memorable story that has to do with a grandchild going to go finally meet his grandmother, who is off her rocker for many different reasons and in the middle of the forest, and is really creepy. Like, it's given real, it's like, it's kind of you know what vibe it gave was that episode of Atlanta, the show that Childish Gambino or Donald Glover came out with some years back, that episode where he's playing like this weird version of Michael Jackson. Okay, I want to leave now type of thing. That's Incident at Bear Creek Lodge. That is the best example of how that those short stories made me feel, to be completely honest with you. So I'm really excited to read her new novel that'll be coming out. But there are far more stories in here that are amazing and could have been full-length novels. My favorite was literally, and all of these are like, there's tons in here, y'all. I cannot tell there how many are there in here? 16 stories are in here, and each one is, I want to say, 5 to 8 pages long. Like, they're actually short stories. One of my favorites in here that was the shortest, I think it was one of the shortest stories because it was only 5 pages long. It was Caretaker. Caretaker was the weirdest, strangest, skinamarink type of story ever. And it had to do with this kid who ends up being found at his home, like this baby, completely fine, seems like they had been fed, had been found at their home after the death of both of their parents, after an altercation that happened between the two of them, unfortunately. And just a heads up, it doesn't talk about it very like blatantly or anything, but there is a dog death, just letting anybody who out there is freaked out by it know. But it's creepy. It feels, and I mean skinamarink because it feels very no light but the TV on and Sesame Street is playing. Like, that's how creepy it feels. And it has to do with ants. It has to do with ants and weird entities and darkness and strangeness. And I still think about that story all the time, thinking I wish I could get a full-length novel of it. There are so many other stories in here that have that vibe and are completely different from one another. And whenever somebody goes, I want a short story collection, I recommend The Black Girl Survives in this one and The Wishing Pool and Other Stories. Favorite collection ever, honestly. I would arguably say one of her best, top five best works. I know The Good House and The Reformatory, and I get it. This, it gets slept on. Now, this is more of a, I guess, weird lit book, honestly, but to me, some of the things that are talked about in here are definitely horrific enough that I feel like it should be considered a horror rather than a sci-fi or a weird lit. Y'all can fight me in the comments about it, but that's Sorrow Land by River Solomon. This book made me a River Solomon stan. They could write the grocery list, I'm reading it. I don't care. There are so many different topics that are discussed in this book, and also going back to that conversation about not writing within the monolith of Black people in our experience. This does it. It's a cult novel. It's an X-Files type of novel. It's a haunting novel. It's a beloved type of novel. It's a queer novel. It's a Where the Wild Things Are type of novel. Like, all of these things are inspiration for what this novel really is. It's alien. It's so many things. And it's all of the different genres I love and references I love thrown into a book in a way that absolutely makes sense. Fern, our main character, escapes a compound, which essentially is a Black cult. During the Civil Rights Movement, a bunch of Black folks said, we're starting a compound, we're removing ourselves from America, and created a cult. What you don't know is what's actually happening underneath that cult. And it's happening to Fern. And after Fern leaves the cult and is constantly on the run, they end up living in the forest. And also keep in mind that our main character, Fern, is intersex. So they end up living in the forest, having 2 children. I think they had become pregnant while they were at the cult, or something along those lines. And they end up raising the twins out not in society. And then they're forced to go back to society with these kids who have only been raised feral. That's an interesting experience all its own, especially when these children were raised to be non-binary, to not accept societal norms or like these ideas of what gender are, which is really, really interesting to kind of look at. And also it's interesting because they're free of race, they're free of gender norms, they're free of all of these things after being raised out in the forest. And then when they're reintroduced to society, what does that mean for a child who's never experienced these things before? We have indigenous characters, we have queer relationships in here, we have a moment where a ghost threesome happens. Yes. That was interesting. We have a moment where body transformations and body horror happens. They go Skeletor at one point. It's amazing, and there's so many different things going on here, but it feels very, very dynamic in the conversation of what society is and what should we expect out of it and what are we even in it in the first place. So many things were covered in here. It was so weird and amazing and gory and gut-wrenching, and I cannot recommend it enough, and it's the whole reason why I'm a River Solomon fan. If you have read Model Home, but you haven't read Sorrowland, you need to get your body on Sorrowland immediately. This is the last of my official top 5 roundup, and this one is probably not necessarily going to be a huge surprise. That's Mary by Nat Cassidy. I finally read this book last year, and it also became a reason why I'm a huge Nat Cassidy fan. I think this is proof, and Nat Cassidy is walking proof, that you, as an artist, if you are listening, if you are researching, if you are learning, which is what you should be doing as a human anyways, but if you are doing any of these things, you can write outside of your identity. I think this is proof that a lot of us are not upset of people who write outside of their identity when it is absolutely genuine and in an effort to talk about these things. Really, the issue is that those who do identify with those identities are not put on the platform to talk about them as much as white men are. I know that there's a lot of discussion around that, the fact that Nat Cassidy is a cis white man talking about the experience of a white middle-aged woman. But I will say, from his acknowledgments, from his foreword and everything, you can really, and even reading the book and, you know, talking to a lot of other women, you can feel that he really did his research. He really was listening. And this came from a genuine place of wanting to not only just understand, but being raised by a single mother and seeing what she experienced and wanting to talk about it, and having a platform to talk about it. It felt genuine. And I think that that's the bigger point on when he's like writing in these perspectives, is the genuinity has to be there, or else it just feels like a scam. And that is something that you absolutely get in Mary. This book is, if you're looking for horror, if some of the things on this list were a little bit too weird lit for you, this is horror. Okay, you're definitely getting it. There's true crime in here. And I also love that Nat Cassidy also brings the conversation of race in here. It's not for a long time. I would have liked a very long time about it. But if you, I don't hear enough about how this ending was. So if you've not heard about this somehow, this is about our main character, Mary, who is about to go through menopause. Mary is having these weird visions, is having hot flashes, is blanking out, all of these different things. And everybody keeps on telling her it's just menopause. And she's like, this feels like it's something more than just menopause. She's having mood swings, and she ends up having to move back in with her aunt, who is horrible, after being laid off from her job because of her age and not being able to pay her rent, and her aunt needing somebody to take care of her. So she moves in with her, which is supposed to be for a short minute. She descends into madness before it can be just a short minute. When she goes back home and she experienced all of this, I think there's enough out there already to kind of tell you she's actually possessed by the spirit of a serial killer who was killed at the same time that she was basically born, and why these hot flashes are not just hot flashes. There is a scene where she is buried in the sand to die that is a monologue on aging and womanhood that feels like something out of a Salvador Dali painting, but truly is amazing. I think that's the best way to describe it, because when I pictured that scene, I was transformed into like that type of surrealism type of painting. I loved that this book talks about being a woman generationally, I love that it talked about the dismissal of women and their health issues. I love that their dismissal in society, how not all women are for women. That's another big thing here as well. How not every young woman is for the freedom of older women as well, and vice versa. And again, even in the ending, I feel like the conversation in regards to how white older women are treated or white women are treated in relation to women of color and how older women of color are treated is one that I think was touched on slightly. I wish it was touched on just a little bit more, but I'm happy as well that this white man actually touched on it in the first place, because it is an important conversation. This book is about really a very singular experience of growing older and going through menopause as a white woman, and that this dismissal and even blame can be placed on Black women, on women of color who end up going through the same circumstances, but are not treated with the same delicate white gloves as white women are. Which, sure, there's a dismissal, but there's a care in their dismissal, as opposed to that of women of color, which, if I don't want to ruin the ending for you, but the ending really sells that, and Mary is like not taking that for an answer either. So I also love that. This is really fantastic. I've heard a lot of people are like, it's a perfect blend of Stephen King's Dolores Claiborne, and it feels like that. It feels like a very gothic, like Annie Wilkes type of thing. Like you're off your rocker. You're a woman, older woman off her rocker type of feeling, and it was just great writing. Fantastic writing. It deserves all the accolades that it's ever gotten. Vibes. All around. The next two I'm about to go over are my honorable mentions, because I did not want to knock any of those out, but these, to not talk about them when they were so important and I still think about them constantly, didn't feel right to me. So let's go over them real quick. There is Jackal by Aaron E. Adams. So this was the talk of the town last year. Everybody in the world was reading this book, and I still feel like it deserves its roses to be talked about, because fortunately I've not heard enough people talk about the ending and what the message of this book really is. It's very gothic in its surroundings and its storytelling as we're working through the story of Liz is her name. Liz and her coming back home, which is in Appalachia, and to a town where Black girls go missing all the time. And until one of her friends, who's white, her stepdaughter, ends up getting snatched. And because of her being a white woman, the sheriffs and all of them are starting to look into it. Like, this monster, this whoever, took the wrong one this time. And having these discussions that are very real to everyday life, and especially growing up in Ohio in the Midwest in a small town, for me personally, a lot of those things felt like they hit home. But one thing that I loved at the end of the story talks about not just this monster, but how this monster lives in all of us. That it's not simply a white person problem, a them problem to solve. It is something that is within that problem that can also be bred inside of us as well, even as the victims. And that it's our job to constantly fight against that monster taking us over and everything. I don't want to go too much to like what the ending of this really is and why I keep on saying monster and everything. It's really important for you to read it yourself. But I do feel like I love that ending, because again, I feel like personally these conversations are one that should be across the board, for everybody needs to do their job towards not perpetuating these things. Of course, we are the victims of these issues, and it's not to say, okay, victims, do something about it, but it's also not our jobs to perpetuate either, or to become the enemy or the villain of our own stories by simply growing in that hatred and starting to have that mistrust. Because then what makes us any better? This book covers that. It talks about it in a really great metaphor, which I absolutely loved. I think about this all the time. I think about that message all the time. And I think that it was something that was really strong and not something I was really expecting to get out of this book, considering the synopsis on it. So, recommend this one. Always will recommend this one. Honestly, I really need to read her next book, One of Us. I think it's coming out soon, or it's already out. I think it's coming out this June, though. I'm not certain. but I think it's coming out this June. I'm not seeing much about it, but that one has to do with hoodoo, and I'm really excited to get into that one. My last recommendation, which I told you at the start of this video, is probably going to be a little divisive. How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. I know. For any of y'all who read the audiobook, Pumpkin is the thorn in the side of this amazing novel, but also was a necessity in my opinion. I know that y'all like, this was the silliest novel ever because of that voice, because of the fact that it is a puppet who is attacking a grieving family. But I feel so strongly that the message behind this book, and personally, I really enjoyed it. I mean, the pumpkin voice really didn't throw me off too much. Honestly, it made me, I feel like there's a meme or I read a tweet or something that was like, this is the idea of if Elmo met you in a dark alley with a knife in his hand. Yeah, that's this. Like, all of a sudden, I was afraid of puppets. And I don't mean like, you know, Slappy the puppet or like marionettes or whatever. I mean like actual like Sesame Street puppets. Like killing you? Like what? That's never been a thing. That's never been a fear. New fear unlocked. I think that it was creepy because of how, and scary because of how ridiculous it was. It's kind of like the idea of Chucky. You're like, he's like a 4-foot-nothing doll. Like just punt him and get the hell out the house. You think that, and then all of a sudden, he's charging towards you with a knife, and you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's how I felt about this book. I know that some of y'all are like sitting there like, because this book was not scary, and it was stupid. I personally don't think that. I think that it was really, really a look at, and I may be biased because I also read this book right after losing my grandmother and my granny, and also experiencing a lot of, at the same time, experiencing a lot of uncovering of secrets within my family because now I'm older, and I'm asking questions because of me going to therapy and getting information and putting pieces together and realizing trauma that's deep set into families. And that's what this book is really all about. While we follow our main character, which let me get the name right real quick, Louise and Mark. We follow our main characters, Louise and Mark. They're siblings, and they've lost their father and their mother at the same time. Unknown circumstances, they both died within the house, and now they're trying to get rid of these things and just move on with their lives. Louise is coming back home after never wanting to come back home, after having a traumatic, really growing up with the family. Mark is the younger brother who has never really had too much responsibility and has always, in Louise's mind, been just taken care of and never really has great ideas. They don't get along. There's a lot of issues in regards to that, and the grief just exacerbates that. And that seemed absolutely real, especially considering what was happening in my family at the same time. Pumpkin, the puppet, who was a hand puppet for their mother, who was a puppeteer, is haunting them and is ruining their family. And there's a scene between Pumpkin and Louise's child that is nightmare fodder. I still think about it clearly every day. But what was the amazing point that made this such a big seller for me was when you realize who Pumpkin actually is and how they have to exorcise him and what this really is. This is a book not about just exorcising puppet demons, but exorcising family trauma. And that lies within a family, no matter who they are to protect, will simply just become demons at some point of the family. Loved it. Loved it. I still love it. Whenever I hear somebody down this book, I don't fight for it, but I do kind of say my piece on what it is about. And I have had a couple of converts. I have had a couple of people go, I didn't think that's what it was. And now that you said that, I wish I would have gotten that out of the book. I think that honestly, the voice of Pumpkin in the audiobook is what ruined it for a lot of people. And it was going to be hit or miss. Where I found it absolutely terrifying to have a voice that sounded like Elmo sit there and say they're going to kill you, and threaten your child with a knife. Somebody else is probably just like, that was the most annoying voice I ever heard in my life, and I can't even hear what they're even saying right now. So this isn't even scary anymore. It was going to be hit or miss every single time, but I do think that this book didn't get a fair shake because of that audio, personally. But I do think that this is an amazing book, and that's why it's on my honorable mentions. Honestly, I think that I know somebody else is gonna go, girl, that's not it. I think that this might be Grady Hendrix' best. And that's coming from somebody who low-key is a Grady Hendrix fan. I like his work, alright? And not all of it's like great, but I like what he's trying to do. He ain't no Nat Cassidy, but I like what he's trying to do. This book was the closest to Nat Cassidy he probably could have gone, to be honest. Something very, very, very insightful. That is the end of today's video. Those are my top 5 and 2 extras of horror that I love. I have another top 5 video coming out soon as well. I really love the idea of just going through top 5 and also how that top 5 will change. I kind of have a feeling that I want to try and maybe next year or something do another top 5. It's kind of like a recap to kind of look at, okay, did any of these get knocked out of your top 5 from reading other books and everything? Because I know that the top 5 that I have now, how many of these did I read this year? Now, I'm gonna be honest. That top 5 right there it's probably been my top 5. But the other top 5 that I have coming up, which is a weird lit one, that one's changed. That one's absolutely changed. And there may even be some surprises on what I considered weird lit aside from something that's more so horror when I end up doing that video. So if you like today's video, subscribe so you can check that video out. That'll be coming sometime soon. And please follow for any other horror, weird lit recommendations to come. Of course, you're going to be seeing some more crafting and Halloween around here that is coming. But at the end of the day, we are still a booktube channel. So please, please follow if that's what you're looking for. It is what I do around here mostly through the year. Thank y'all for watching today. I'd love to hear what your top 5 horror novels are as well, if you have any honorable mentions. I know that in our Discord, there was a lot of conversation on it was way too hard to pick 5, so I'm definitely doing honorable mentions. Which, by the way, if you're not following the Discord, you should go to the Discord. If you're looking for a book community of other people who are reading these types of books, our Discord's a lot of fun. We have a lot of conversations that kind of talk about, like, and a lot of us have some of the same book taste for the most part. So for the most part, if they're recommending new books in the Discord, I would take the recommendations. Go check that out in the description. There's a link to that, as well as the book club. We've already chosen our May book club sweet read, which is Strange Pictures by Uketsu. And we're actually bringing back our live book club meeting conversation, which I'm really excited about. That was voted for in the Discord. Again, go to the Discord if you want to vote on things that are happening in other places. I'm really, really excited. But thank you so much for watching today's video. I'm excited to bring some more top 5s to the channel and recommendations to the channel. So thanks y'all for following. And I will see y'all in the next one. Bye!